The Cathari homeworld of Velthera was dying a slow and painful death. The planet that once sparkled with crystal forests and floating cities now looked like a broken toy scattered across the void. Smoke rose from burning cities while the ground shook under constant bombardment from the Vex. Swarm ships that circled overhead like hungry vultures. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human vessel, UCS Defender, and watched the destruction through the main viewing screen. His hands gripped the metal railing so tight his knuckles turned white. 3 million Cathari people were trapped underground in bunkers that leaked air and had no food left. Their beautiful civilization was being torn apart piece by creatures that ate everything in their path. The Galactic Council had met just 2 days ago to discuss the Cathari situation. Jake had watched the vote count climb on his personal data pad with growing anger. 847 votes to abandon the Cathari completely. Only 3 votes to help them fight. The mighty Altarian Empire said they needed their ships for more important battles. The Zephyrian Collective claimed the Cathari homeworld had no strategic value worth saving. Even the healing pods of Sanctuary Prime turned their backs on millions of dying people because they said their medical supplies were needed elsewhere. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from her communication station with tears in her eyes. Captain Morrison, sir, we are getting a transmission from the Cathari Underground Command Center. They want to know if we came here to take the survivors away from their planet. Jake felt his jaw muscles tighten as he thought about what the galaxy had become. The Cathari had been good friends to everyone for hundreds of years. They shared their crystal technology freely with any species that asked for help. They worked as peacekeepers between warring planets and never asked for anything in return except friendship. Now, when they needed help the most, every single major power in the galaxy had voted to let them die alone. "Open the channel, Amy," Jake said in a voice that carried across the entire bridge. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Colonial Ship Defender. We did not come here to run away with you. We came here to fight beside you." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the ship engines. Finally, Elder Zarathil of the Cathari Council spoke through the translation system. Her voice sounded tired and broken, but also confused. "Captain Morrison, your entire human species has only 2 billion people living on 12 small worlds. The Vex swarm has destroyed entire star systems with hundreds of billions of people. Why would you risk everything you have for us?" Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. He saw determination in every pair of eyes looking back at him. Lieutenant Rodriguez had stopped crying and now sat up straight at her station. Commander Pete Wallace at the weapons console had a grim smile on his face. Even young Ensign Tony Phillips at the navigation station looked ready to fly straight into hell if ordered to do so. "Because Elder Zarathil, that is what family does for each other," Jake said slowly so every word would be clear. "Any people willing to stand with us against the darkness are family to us. We do not abandon family no matter how bad things look." The Cathari Elder was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again. "Captain Morrison, we have been scanning your fleet since you arrived in our system. You have 47 ships total. Our long-range sensors show the Vex swarm approaching with over 3,000 vessels. Each one of their ships is larger than your biggest warship. This is not a battle you can win." Jake smiled for the first time in days. "Elder Zarathil, we humans have a saying. We do not abandon family and we do not give up when the odds look bad. We especially do not give up when good people need our help. Today we make our stand here above your world. Today we show the galaxy what it means to keep your word." Commander Wallace turned from his weapons station. "Captain, the Vex swarm will reach Velthera in approximately 6 hours. Admiral Carter is requesting all ship commanders report to the flagship for final battle planning." Jake nodded and handed command of the Defender to his first officer. As he prepared to transport to Admiral Lisa Carter's ship, he thought about how they had gotten to this point. The human species was still young compared to most galactic powers. They had only been traveling between stars for 200 years. They had small fleets and limited resources compared to Empires that controlled thousands of star systems, but humans had something the older races seemed to have forgotten. They remembered what it felt like to be alone and afraid. They remembered what it meant when someone showed up to help when everyone else walked away. Earth itself had been attacked by hostile aliens 50 years ago, and the Cathari had been among the few species that sent aid without being asked. The transport beam dissolved Jake's body into energy and reformed him on the bridge of the UCS Resilience. Admiral Carter stood over a massive holographic display showing the Velthera system and the approaching Vex swarm. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight military style, and her uniform bore the scars of many previous battles. "Jake, glad you could make it," Admiral Carter said without looking up from the tactical display. "I want you to see this before the other commanders arrive. Our intelligence reports show the Vex are bringing everything they have for this attack. They want to make an example of the Cathari to discourage other species from resisting." Jake studied the holographic representation of the enemy fleet. The Vex ships moved like a single living organism flowing through space. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb light itself, and their weapon systems could tear apart planets. "Admiral, what are our chances of actually winning this fight?" Lisa Carter finally looked up and met his eyes. "Honestly, Jake, our chances of winning are basically zero. Our chances of making the Vex pay a heavy price for every Cathari life they take are much better. Our chances of showing the galaxy what courage looks like are excellent." More commanders began materializing on the bridge as the transport system brought them over from their respective ships. Jake recognized most of them from previous missions and training exercises. These were good people who had volunteered to stay behind when the human government offered to evacuate all personnel from the battle zone. "Listen up, everyone," Admiral Carter announced as the last commander arrived. "In 5 hours, we face an enemy that has consumed entire civilizations. They expect us to run like everyone else has done. Instead, we are going to show them and the galaxy what humans do when innocent people need protecting. We are going to fight." The human fleet spread out around Velthera like a protective shield made of steel and determination. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the UCS Resilience, watching her tactical display as 47 human ships took their positions against an enemy that should have destroyed them in minutes. Her hands moved across the control panels with practiced ease, while her mind calculated angles and distances that might give them even the smallest advantage. Commander Pete Wallace brought his destroyer, UCS Relentless, into position near the planet's largest moon. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Kelly Brooks, ran final checks on their missile systems while the rest of his crew prepared for what everyone knew would be their final battle. Pete had served in the human fleet for 15 years and had never seen odds this bad. 3,000 Vex ships against 47 human vessels was not a fight any sane person would take. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter," her voice crackled across the fleet communication system. "In 10 minutes, the Vex swarm will arrive in this system. Today we do not fight just for humanity, but for every species that believes in protecting the innocent. Remember what we came here to do, and remember who we are fighting for." Captain Tony Phillips gripped the command chair of his Corvette UCS, defiant as the first enemy contacts appeared on his long-range sensors. The Vex ships moved through space like drops of black oil flowing together into a single massive shape. Their hulls absorbed all light that touched them, making them look like holes cut out of the starfield itself. Tony had read every intelligence report about Vex tactics and knew they preferred to overwhelm their enemies with pure numbers and firepower. "Captain Phillips, we are detecting massive energy buildups from the Lid Vex vessels," reported his sensor operator, Ensign Rick Anderson. "They appear to be charging their planetary bombardment weapons. If those weapons fire at full power, they will crack the planet's crust." Tony felt his stomach tighten as he realized what the Vex planned to do. They were not just going to attack the human fleet. They were going to destroy Velthera completely and kill every Cathari still alive on the surface or underground. 3 million innocent people would die in the first few minutes of the battle if the human fleet could not stop those bombardment weapons from firing. All ships, this is Admiral Carter, execute attack pattern Alpha immediately. The Admiral's voice cut through the tension on every bridge. Target those bombardment ships before they can fire on the planet. Everything else is secondary to protecting the Cathari people. The human fleet moved forward like a pack of wolves attacking a much larger enemy. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable than the massive Vex vessels, but they were also much smaller and had far less armor protection. Captain Jake Morrison pushed the UCS Defender through a gap between two Vex cruisers while his weapons teams fired everything they had at the enemy's weak spots. Engineer Amy Rodriguez worked frantically in the Defender's engine room to keep the ship's power systems running at maximum output. The engines were already operating beyond their safe limits, but she knew they needed every bit of speed they could get to stay ahead of the Vex weapons. Sweat poured down her face as she manually adjusted power couplings that sparked and smoked under the strain. "Bridge, this is engineering," Amy called through the communication system. "I can give you 20% more engine power, but it will burn out our primary systems in about 30 minutes. "Do it, Amy," Captain Morrison replied immediately. "We just need to last long enough to take out those bombardment ships." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Human ships that should have been destroyed. In the first exchange of fire, continued fighting with damaged weapons and broken hulls. When their missiles ran out, they used their energy weapons. When their energy weapons failed, they rammed their ships directly into Vex vessels like guided missiles made of metal and human courage. Commander Wallace watched his tactical display as 3 Vex destroyers surrounded his ship on all sides. His weapons were nearly empty and his shields had failed completely. "Kelly, how much power do we have left in the reactor?" "Enough for one more trick, sir," Engineer Brooks replied from the engine room. "But if I overload the fusion reactor, it will cook everyone on this ship from the inside out." Wallace looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Every person there had volunteered to stay behind when the evacuation ships left human space. They all knew this mission would probably be their last. "Do it, Kelly. Make those Vex ships pay for every Cathari life they want to take." The UCS Relentless exploded in a ball of nuclear fire that took out 2 Vex destroyers and crippled a third. Wallace and his entire crew died instantly, but their sacrifice opened a gap in the enemy formation that other human ships immediately exploited. Captain Phillips drove his corvette through the opening and launched his remaining missiles at the largest Vex bombardment ship. Dr. Sharon Davis worked in the underground medical stations on Velthra's surface treating wounded Cathari civilians and the few human Marines who had volunteered to fight alongside the defenders. The underground bunkers shook constantly from the battle raging in space above them. Every few minutes, pieces of destroyed ships would streak across the sky like burning meteors. "Dr. Davis, we have more wounded coming in from Sector 7, called Nurse Maria Santos as she helped carry injured Cathari on stretchers. "The Vex are using some kind of biological weapon that causes severe burns." Sharon looked up from the Cathari child she was treating and felt her heart break a little. More. The little girl could not have been more than 8 years old, and her crystal-like skin was covered in strange burns that seemed to eat away at her flesh. "Get me everything we have for treating biological contamination. We are not going to let these people die while our fleet fights for them." Above the planet, the space battle continued with desperate intensity. Human ships that had lost their main engines used their maneuvering thrusters to ram into Vex vessels. Crews that had lost their weapon systems used their ships as guided bombs. Captain after captain made the final choice to sacrifice themselves and their ships to protect the 3 million Cathari still alive on the planet below. Admiral Carter watched her fleet shrink from 47 ships to 36 to 24 as the hours passed. Each ship that died took several Vex vessels with them, but the enemy still had thousands of ships left. Her own flagship had taken heavy damage and was leaking atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. "Admiral, we are receiving a priority transmission from the edge of the system," reported her communication officer. "It appears to be from a Zephyrian medical ship requesting permission to enter the battle zone." Carter stared at her display in disbelief. The Zephyrians had voted to abandon the Cathari just 3 days ago. Why would they send a medical ship into a battle zone where it would probably be destroyed in minutes? Open a channel and find out what they want. Admiral Carter, this is Fleet Commander Zelandra of the Zephyrian medical vessel Healing Light, came the transmission. We have been monitoring your battle and wish to provide medical assistance to Cathari casualties. We also bring supplies and reinforcements. Carter looked at her tactical display and saw not just one Zephyrian ship, but an entire medical fleet accompanied by armed escorts. Behind them came Altarian supply ships and even some vessels from the healing pods of Sanctuary. Prime, the galaxy was finally waking up to see what humanity had been trying to show them all along. News of the impossible battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On every civilized world, communication networks buzzed with reports that defied all military logic and strategic thinking. The humans were not only still fighting after 6 hours of combat, but they were actually making the Vex swarm pay a terrible price for every ship they destroyed. General Carthex of the Altarian Empire stood in his command center on the capital world watching live feeds from the battle zone. His tactical computers had predicted total human fleet destruction within the first 2 hours of combat. Instead, his screens showed burning Vex wrecks scattered across the Velthera system, while the remaining human ships continued their relentless attacks against impossible odds. How are they still alive? Carthex demanded of his senior staff officers, who stared at the displays with the same confusion their general felt. Our best military analysts calculated that the human fleet would be completely destroyed before they could inflict any meaningful damage on the Vex forces. Colonel Vesara, his chief tactical advisor, pulled up detailed analysis reports on her personal datapad. Sir, the humans are fighting in ways that our computers cannot predict or understand. They are using their ships as weapons when their actual weapons fail. They are sacrificing themselves to save people they barely know. It goes against every principle of logical military strategy. No, Colonel, General Carthex said quietly as he watched a human destroyer ram itself into a Vex battleship to protect a group of medical evacuation shuttles. It goes against every principle of selfish military strategy. They are not fighting to win territory or resources. They are fighting because they believe it is the right thing to do. Similar conversations were taking place in council chambers and military headquarters across the civilized galaxy. The Zephyrian Collective's Council of Minds had convened in emergency session after their probability calculation systems completely failed to account for human behavior patterns. Their most advanced computers could not understand why any species would sacrifice so much for people who could offer them nothing valuable in return. Dr. Sharon Davis continued working in the underground medical centers of Velthera as the battle raged overhead. The constant stream of wounded Cathari civilians had slowed as most of the population moved deeper underground for safety. She had been working for 8 hours straight treating injuries from Vex biological weapons that seemed designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. Dr. Davis, we have a problem, called Nurse Maria Santos from across the medical bay. We are running out of medical supplies and the transport shuttles cannot reach us while the space battle continues. Some of these people will die without proper treatment. Sharon looked around the medical bay at dozens of injured Cathari who depended on her skills to survive. Many of them were children whose parents had been killed in the initial Vex attacks. She had promised these people that humanity would not abandon them, and she intended to keep that promise no matter what the cost. Contact the fleet and tell them we need an emergency medical supply drop, Sharon ordered. Tell them we have critically wounded patients who will not survive without immediate treatment. Above the planet, Admiral Carter received the medical request just as her flagship took another direct hit from Vex plasma weapons. Half her bridge crew was dead or wounded, and her ship was barely holding together. She had started the battle with 47 ships under her command, and now only 18 were still capable of fighting. Admiral, we cannot spare any ships for a supply run to the surface, reported her tactical officer Commander Rick Anderson, whose arm hung useless at his side from shrapnel wounds. Every ship we have left is needed to keep the Vex from breaking through to the planet. Carter looked at her tactical display and saw the truth in his words. The Vex had adapted their strategy after taking heavy losses from human ramming attacks. They were now concentrating their forces into tight formations that the remaining human ships could not penetrate. In another few hours, the human fleet would be completely destroyed and nothing would stop the Vex from killing every living thing on Velthora. Admiral Carter, this is Fleet Commander Zelandra requesting permission to approach the planet, came a transmission from the Zephyrian medical ships that had arrived at the edge of the system. We have medical supplies and personnel ready to assist with Cathari casualties. Carter stared at her communication display in amazement. The Zephyrians had voted to abandon the Cathari just 3 days earlier. Now they were volunteering to fly their unarmed medical ships through an active battle zone to help people they had written off as lost causes. Commander Zelandra, you are cleared to approach the planet, but be advised that Vex fighters are actively hunting for targets in the atmosphere. Your medical ships will be defenseless against attack. Understood, Admiral Carter, came the reply. We have learned something important by watching your fleet fight today. We have learned that some things are more important than our own safety. The Zephyrian medical ships moved through the battle zone like ghosts slipping between the massive Vex formations. Their captains used every trick they knew to avoid detection, while carrying desperately needed medical supplies to the planet's surface. Behind them came Altarian supply ships loaded with weapons and ammunition for the human fleet. Captain Tony Phillips watched his tactical display as friendly contacts began appearing throughout the system. Ships from dozens of different species were arriving to join a battle that every military expert had declared hopeless. The mighty healing pods of Sanctuary Prime brought their massive hospital ships into orbit around Velthora. Altarian warships took positions alongside the surviving human vessels and opened fire on Vex formations with weapons powerful enough to crack small moons. This is impossible, muttered Ensign Kelly Brooks from her position at the weapons console of the UCS Defiant. 12 hours ago, these same species voted to let the Cathari die alone. Now they are risking their own fleets to help us fight. Tony smiled grimly as he watched an Altarian dreadnought destroy 3 Vex cruisers with a single volley from its main guns. Kelly, we just showed the galaxy what courage looks like. Sometimes that is all it takes to wake people up to what really matters. The battle began to change as more and more ships arrived from across the galaxy. Species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries found themselves fighting side by side against a common enemy. The Vex swarm that had seemed unstoppable just hours earlier now faced a united galaxy that remembered what it meant to protect the innocent elder. Zarathul emerged from the deep underground bunkers for the first time in months to watch the space battle through the crystal observation domes that had somehow survived the Vex bombardment. Tears of hope streamed down her face as she saw ships from 50 different worlds fighting together above her dying planet. They came, she whispered to her aide who stood beside her watching the incredible sight. When no one else would help us, the humans came. And now, because of their courage, the entire galaxy has come to stand with us. The Vex swarm began to show signs of confusion as their simple strategy of overwhelming force met organized resistance from a unified galactic fleet. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by attacking isolated species that fought alone. They had never faced an enemy that grew stronger as the battle continued instead of weaker. The battle above Velthora had become something no military strategist had ever imagined possible. What started as humanity's desperate last stand had grown into the largest combined fleet action in galactic history. Ships from 60 different species now fought together in formations that mixed human destroyers with Altarian battleships and Zephyrian medical vessels converted into mobile weapon platforms. Commander Rick Anderson found himself in command of the combined tactical operations center aboard the heavily damaged UCS Defender. His makeshift command post consisted of communication, equipment salvaged from 3 different destroyed ships, and tactical displays showing fleet positions in 6 different alien languages. Around him worked officers from a dozen species who had never fought together before today. Commander Anderson, the Vex are regrouping near the system's outer edge. reported Lieutenant Vextel of the Altarian Navy, whose massive frame barely fit into the human-sized command chair. Our combined sensors indicate they are preparing some kind of new attack formation we have not seen before. Rick studied the tactical display showing the reformed Vex swarm. The enemy had learned from their earlier defeats and was now organizing their ships into tight defensive clusters that would be much harder to penetrate with ramming attacks. More concerning was the massive construct they were assembling from the wreckage of their destroyed vessels. "What is that thing they are building?" Rick asked the Zephyrian intelligence officer who had been monitoring Vex communications. "Commander Anderson, our analysis suggests it is a planet-killer weapon," replied Officer Zilmora in her species' musical voice. "The Vex appear to be combining the remains of their destroyed ships into a single massive weapon designed to crack planetary crusts. If that weapon reaches firing position, it will destroy Velthora completely." General Carthax of the Altarian Empire listened to the tactical briefing from his flagship UFS Dominator, while his weapons crews prepared for what might be the final phase of the battle. His massive dreadnought had taken heavy damage fighting alongside the smaller human ships, but its main guns were still operational and ready to fire. "Your species continues to confuse us, Human Anderson," General Carthax said during a brief communication break between attacks. "You risk everything you have for people who can offer you nothing valuable in return. By all logical calculations, you should have retreated hours ago when the odds became impossible." Rick looked around his improvised command center at the mixed crew of humans and aliens working together to coordinate their defense. His uniform was torn and stained with blood from a dozen minor wounds, but his voice remained steady. "General Carthax, that is where you are wrong. The Cathari people offer us something incredibly valuable. They offer us their survival and their friendship. In our way of thinking, that is worth more than all the territory and resources in the galaxy." The combined fleet moved into attack position as the Vex planet killer weapon neared completion. Captain Tony Phillips pushed his badly damaged corvette UCS Defiant through the formation alongside ships 10 times its size. His crew had been fighting for 12 hours straight and half his systems had failed completely, but they refused to give up while innocent people still needed protection. "Captain Phillips, we are detecting massive energy buildups from the Vex weapon," reported Ensign Amy Rodriguez from her jury-rigged sensor station. "If that thing reaches full power, it will be able to destroy planets from 3 star systems away. We have to stop it before it finishes charging." Captain Maria Santos of the human science vessel UCS Discovery worked frantically to analyze the energy patterns coming from the Vex superweapon. Her ship had been converted into a mobile laboratory and was protected by an escort of Altarian fighters while she tried to find some weakness in the enemy construction. "I am detecting a harmonic frequency pattern in the Vex biomechanical systems," Maria reported to the Combined Fleet Command. "All of their ships use the same basic organic computer network to coordinate their actions. If we can find the exact frequency and amplify it, we might be able to turn their own technology against them." Admiral Carter received the report just as our flagship took another direct hit from Vex plasma weapons. The UCS Resilience was barely holding together after hours of constant battle, but she refused to abandon her position while other ships still needed coordination. Around her, the bridge crew worked with injuries that would have sent them to sick bay under normal circumstances. "Discovery, this is Admiral Carter. How long do you need to calculate the exact harmonic frequency?" she asked while debris from a destroyed Vex cruiser rattled against her ship's hull. "Admiral, I need every ship in the fleet to focus their sensors on the Vex super weapon while I run the calculations," Maria replied. "The more data I have, the faster I can find the frequency that will shut down their entire network." The combined fleet began to move in perfect coordination despite being made up of ships from dozens of different species with completely different tactical doctrines. Human ships provided close-range fire support, while Altarian battleships hammered the enemy with their massive guns. Zephyrian medical vessels rescued crews from damaged ships, while healing pod hospital ships treated wounded from every species in the fleet. Dr. Sharon Davis continued working in the underground medical centers of Velthora as the final phase of the battle began overhead. She had been treating wounded for 14 hours straight and was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Around her worked medical teams from 6 different species who had volunteered to risk their lives helping Cathari civilians. Dr. Davis, the surface sensors are detecting massive energy discharges from the space battle, reported Nurse Kelly Brooks, who had been monitoring communications with the fleet. It sounds like our people are preparing for one final attack against the Vex superweapon. Sharon looked up from the Cathari child she was treating and felt her heart fill with pride for what her species had accomplished. Humanity had come to this distant world with nothing but determination and courage. Now they had inspired an entire galaxy to remember what it meant to fight for something greater than themselves. The Discovery completed its calculations just as the Vex planet killer weapon reached critical charge levels. Every ship in the combined fleet focused their communication arrays on the massive enemy construct and began broadcasting a precisely calibrated harmonic frequency that resonated through the biomechanical systems of every Vex vessel in the system. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vex ships began to tear themselves apart as their organic computer networks turned against their mechanical components. The massive planet killer weapon collapsed in on itself as its biomechanical systems fought each other instead of working together. Across the entire Vex fleet, the same pattern repeated as ships that had seemed unstoppable just moments before became helpless hulks. Drifting through space. Elder Zarethel watched from the crystal observation dome as the Vex fleet destroyed itself above her homeworld. The space around Velthora filled with debris from thousands of enemy ships, while the combined galactic fleet remained intact and victorious. After months of living underground in fear, her people could finally return to the surface and begin rebuilding their civilization. "They did it," she whispered as tears of joy streamed down her crystal-like face. The humans kept their promise and the galaxy remembered what it means to protect each other. 6 months after the Battle of Velthora, the Cathari homeworld had become the most important place in the galaxy. Ships from hundreds of worlds arrived daily, bringing representatives who wanted to be part of something that had never existed before. In galactic history, the crystal cities were being rebuilt with help from every major species, while construction crews from 50 different worlds worked together to create meeting halls large enough to hold the new alliance. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the main assembly chamber of what would soon become the Covenant of Worlds headquarters. The building itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering with human steel supporting Altarian energy systems and Zephyrian communication networks, all protected by Cathari crystal technology. Around him, delegates from every civilized world in the galaxy prepared for the most important political meeting in recorded history. Elder Zarethel of the Cathari Council approached Jake with a smile that seemed to light up her entire crystal-like face. She had become the unofficial leader of the new alliance after her people's courage during the dark months of Vex occupation inspired others to remember what real bravery looked like. Her voice carried the hope of billions of people when she spoke to the assembled delegates. "Friends, we gather today not as separate species competing for resources and territory, but as one people sharing the same dream of a galaxy where no one stands alone against darkness. 6 months ago, my people faced extinction while the old Galactic Council voted to abandon us to our fate. Today we create something better based on the simple idea that every life has value worth protecting." Admiral Lisa Carter sat with the human delegation wearing a new uniform that bore the insignia of the combined defense fleet. Her hair had gone completely gray during the battle above Velthora, but her eyes still burned with the same determination that had driven her to stand against impossible odds. She had been chosen to lead the military forces of the new alliance because every species trusted her judgment after watching her fight for people she barely knew. Admiral Carter, the old Galactic Council has officially dissolved itself after losing support from most member worlds, reported General Carthex, who had become her second in command despite once serving an empire that voted to abandon the Cathari. The Altarian Empire has voted to join the Covenant of Worlds along with the Zephyrian Collective and the healing pods of Sanctuary Prime. Lisa nodded as she reviewed the list of worlds that had requested membership in the new alliance. The number grew every day as species that had once competed with each other now worked together on projects that benefited everyone. The old system of galactic politics based on fear and self-interest was dying while something better took its place. Dr. Sharon Davis worked in the new medical research center that had been built with funding from 30 different worlds. Her team included doctors and scientists from every major species who shared their knowledge freely to develop better treatments for diseases that affected all sentient life. The spirit of cooperation that started during the battle had spread to every area of galactic civilization. Dr. Davis, we have received the final test results from the Joint Biological Research Project, reported Dr. Zilanara, a Zephyrian scientist who specialized in biomechanical systems. The treatments we developed using combined medical knowledge from all our species are showing incredible success rates against diseases that individual worlds could never cure alone. Sharon smiled as she looked at the data showing dramatic improvements in medical care across the galaxy. Children who would have died from genetic diseases were now living healthy lives because species that had once hoarded their medical knowledge were now sharing everything they knew. The galaxy was becoming a better place for everyone. Commander Rick Anderson had been promoted to Director of Cooperative Operations after proving that different species could work together effectively during the crisis. His office overlooked the construction site where workers from dozens of worlds built the new Combined Fleet Academy, where young officers from every species would train together as one unified force. Director Anderson, we have requests for membership from 47 additional worlds this week, reported his assistant, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had recovered from her injuries during the battle and chose to stay on Velthera to help build the new alliance. The old system of competitive politics is collapsing as more species realize the benefits of working together. Rick looked out his window at Cathari children playing in the rebuilt crystal gardens alongside human children, whose parents had volunteered to help with reconstruction efforts. 6 months ago, these two species barely knew each other existed. Now their children grew up together learning that cooperation was stronger than competition. Captain Tony Phillips commanded one of the new joint patrol ships that protected trade routes throughout the galaxy. His crew included officers from 12 different species who had learned to work together so well they could coordinate complex operations without even speaking. The combined defense fleet had become the most effective military force in galactic history because it fought for principles instead of territory. Captain Phillips, we are receiving a distress call from the Outer Rim territories, reported his tactical officer Ensign Maria Santos, whose brother had died during the Battle of Velthera, but who continued serving because she believed in what they had built. Pirates are attacking merchant vessels near the frontier worlds. Tony smiled grimly as he ordered his ship to respond to the emergency call. 6 months ago, each world would have protected only its own ships while pirates terrorized everyone else. Now the combined defense fleet responded to threats against any civilian vessel regardless of what species operated it because the new alliance protected everyone equally. The memorial ceremony took place on the anniversary of the battle in a crystal amphitheater built where the first Vex bombs had fallen. Names of everyone who died fighting for the Cathari were carved in walls of pure crystal that would last forever. Human names stood beside Altarian and Zephyrian, names with no distinction between species because they had all died for the same cause. Elder Zarathil spoke to the thousands of people gathered for the ceremony, while representatives from every world in the galaxy listened by communication link. Her words were translated into hundreds of languages, but their meaning remained the same in every tongue. The humans taught us something we had forgotten during the dark years of competitive politics. They taught us that the strength of any civilization is measured not by what it can take, but by what it chooses to give. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the memorial wall reading the names of friends who had died to save people they barely knew. Commander Pete Wallace, who rammed his ship into a Vex dreadnought. Engineer Kelly Brooks, who sacrificed her life to give other ships the power they needed to fight. Hundreds of others who chose to stand when everyone else ran away. The humans have a saying that has become our motto, Elder Zarathil continued. They say not on our watch, meaning that evil will not succeed while good people are willing to fight against it. Today, we expand that promise to include every world and every species in our alliance. Never again will any of us face darkness alone, because this is our time and we will defend it together. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for all who had died, but the work of building a better galaxy continued. Trade flowed freely between worlds that had once been enemies. Scientific knowledge was shared instead of hoarded. Medical treatments developed by one species were given freely to all others. The Vex swarm had been scattered and broken, but the civilization that defeated them had become stronger than ever. Jake Morrison looked up at the stars visible through the crystal dome and thought about how much the galaxy had changed. 6 months ago, different species fought each other over resources while ignoring real threats to everyone. Now they worked together on projects that benefited all sentient life because they had learned that cooperation was stronger than competition. The phrase, "not on our time," had become a rallying cry spoken in hundreds of languages across thousands of worlds. It meant that as long as one person was willing to stand up for what was right, then no one would stand alone against evil. The galaxy had remembered what it meant to hope, and that memory would burn in the stars forever.